In this video, I'm going to give a very brief introduction to REST. So REST stands for representational state transfer. You don't have to know that. It's a set of architectural standards that APIs can meet. And they're not the only standards, but due to time limitations, they're the ones we'll cover in this class. And I won't be walking through the REST standards in too much detail because we're not going to be learning to design APIs in this class. And therefore, the REST standards are going to mostly live under the hood. One part of REST, the HTTP status codes, will be useful in a programming context, though. REST was first defined in a somewhat technical 30-page chapter of a PhD dissertation. So this is going to be a loose summary. It will not capture all of the technical detail or nuance. So the way I introduced APIs probably make this first item seem pretty clear, but we have repositories of resources, not actions. So if we have an online weather database, that database stores weather. The weather is a resource. It does not store the concept of getting the weather in Boston. It stores the weather in Boston. The resources are accessed using standard HTTP methods. And in this class, the method we really care about is the get method for when we're pulling data out of a database. If I can find Spider, here we go. You see get is a method of the requests package. Requests are stateless. Trying to put a 3 in front of here. There we go. Requests are stateless. This means essentially that the request contains all the information needed to carry out the request. And the simplest example is that if you're trying to access a password protected database and your request needs to include login details, then every time you make a request, you have to include those login details because there's no logged in state. There are no states. Requests are stateless. Standardized responses. So we always ask our question in the same way using get, and we always get our answer in the same way. And this has changed, but in 2025, that is going to mean a JSON format. The significance here, I mean, this isn't just convenience. These databases are programming language agnostic. We should be able to access them in Python. We should be able to access them in JavaScript. So if these databases were giving us our answers in some Python-specific format that JavaScript didn't have, that would be a problem. So in order to be RESTful, we need these standardized responses. And we should be able to get meaningful HTTP status codes. That is, we can send a request and the request can work or the request can fail. I mean, maybe we forget this stateless condition and we try to send a request to a password protected database and we don't include the necessary information, so our request fails. Or maybe we've made a typo in the URL. And the only one of these you really probably need to memorize is that 200 is the good one. This is what we want. This means that everything has gone according to plan. And this is helpful because it lets us put error handling right into our code when we're working in Python. So this is the little code snippet we saw earlier from Geeks for Geeks. This is stock market information, by the way. And we've modified it a little. So now it has this if else conditional. If the status code is 200, everything's gone great. We have a response and we convert it to the JSON format, or we make sure it's in the JSON format, and we write that into the data. Otherwise, something's gone wrong. We don't have data, so we set data to none. The server and the client are separate. And I already talked about this a little earlier. An example of this is that the server where the data lives doesn't know what programming language the client application is going to be using. So it has to be sending the client data in a format that is parsable by any programming language or any major programming language, at least. And for our purposes, I think that's pretty much it. And again, it's worth throwing in a few disclaimers here. These are the REST standards as I have interpreted them. You might see them phrased differently somewhere else. I'm, as I said, trying to take the most relevant bits of a pretty technical bit of writing and present them. Um, these standards are understood as best practices a lot of the time, but they're not enforced. I mean, there's no oversight body looking at APIs and making sure they all use the same error codes. But in the examples we do in this class, the APIs we're looking at will be at least broadly RESTful.